Everyone, welcome to Catalyst Live. Thanks for attending here. Quick context for those joining. This is a weekly stream that we'll be doing for MediaBuyer.com Catalyst, and essentially we'll be streaming the first 25, 30 minutes publicly. This is where we can get real training from our pre-vetted top 1% media buyers at MediaBuyer.com who have spent hundreds of millions profitably on ads. And for Catalyst members watching, stick around until the stream cuts here, as we're going to be doing a private Q&A where you can get direct feedback on your campaigns, ads, creatives, all that fun stuff. And then for everyone else watching the stream, you can get direct access to these Q&As plus the calls with any of these legendary rockstar pre-vetted media buyers. You can just check out the link below to apply to join Catalyst or to register for the first half of these live streams. With that said, let's jump into it, Antonio.
Heck yeah, let's go, guys. So create a strategy. This is obviously a hot topic.
Oh, by the way, I have to give you a little bit of preface here. So quick background: Antonio spent over 350 million on Meta ads verifiably, generated over 700 million. He scaled, extremely huge brands in direct response, and dozens of 7 and 8 figure brands as well. So he's one of the lead verified media buyers that are leading Catalyst here. And today is going to be talking about creative strategy here. So anyway, Antonio, take it away.
Heck yeah, let's go. Thank you for the intro, Matteo. So yeah, creative strategy, guys. Right now, more and more to need to move over. I'm going to be sharing some info on literally the best practices I've seen over accounts spending 6 figures, even 7 figures a day in ad spend. So I think it's going to be pretty helpful. Obviously, there's a big difference nowadays between a decentish creative strategy and a really top tier creative strategy. And I'm literally refining this framework every single day with my own clients, with my own brand as well, because I'm also a business owner. I don't do just media buying, I also have my own brands. So I've been into all sides of the equation, managing creative teams as well. So we're going to be talking a little bit about all these things today. So with no further ado, let me share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see it. It probably should be good. And guys, what the good creative strategy operations were doing up until last year, pretty much, if not all of them, a vast majority of them, was what we call the structural approach, right? I mean, there are many ways to call it, but I call it the structural approach at least, which is literally dividing videos into hook, body, and CTA, right? So 3 parts for every video. You have the first few seconds, where most people would be measuring at least the hook rate, which is the 3 seconds video divided by the amount of clicks. The body section of the video, so obviously the meat of the video, where typically you have the big idea, you have the angle, and you also pre-qualify people to eventually click on your ad, and then the call to action, right? So where you actually push people to click. And by the way, there are many variations of the structure. For example, one structure that I learned when I was media buying millions of dollars a day for Client Accelerators, an amazing New Jersey-based agency with very big clients that I managed. For example, Mike Tyson, a really cool name. Even though it wasn't the one that we scaled the most, but it's a really cool name to mention. But there at Client Accelerators, from the great mentor, friend, and entrepreneur Mike Montempo, actually we had many CTAs. So we had the first hook, then typically we had the first part of the body, then the first call to action, then another part of the body, and then the second call to action. So there are many different variations of that, but mainly that's how most people analyze video creative strategy, which is typically the one that people scale the most. Having said that, we will be talking about a lot of images creative strategy as well. Okay, and mainly until the Andromeda updates, that now it's old news already, but a lot of people are talking about it last year, even though it has been rolling out progressively already since before last year. People were just changing hooks with winning bodies. That was the 80-20 of most strategies, not all of them obviously, but most strategies. They were still testing some new concepts, but it was mainly hook testing sometimes, and creatives will last for sometimes years, which is ridiculous, but they actually did. So you could have like a just find one winning body, and then you start testing hooks, and you're golden for a long time. That's not the case anymore. So at least the top tier operations, there are obviously still a lot of them that have this, at least this main structure in mind, but more and more, it's what I call a holistic approach, or also a variable approach. Right? I mean, that's on me. That's my type of framework. That's how I call it. But let's call it a holistic approach. That's how most top tier creative strategy operations are operating nowadays. And it's all about the 80-20 as well, which I always like saying. The Pareto principle is all about being able to identify the few variables that actually move the needle for your stage, whether you're spending $100 a day, whether you're spending literally 100,000 a day, is literally the same approach. But obviously, you're going to prioritize different things, right? And that's the whole spiel of it. So, for example, this already is in order of importance. Typically, for most levels in most operations, typically the angle is going to be the biggest variable that you can always test in your creative strategy. So this is really the big story, if you will, that ties together the hook, right, and the actual offer that you have on the back end that pre-qualifies people to actually click on your ad and perform an action into your website that you want people to perform, whether this is generating a lead, booking a call, or making a sale. Okay, so that's very important. That's typically the biggest variable, and I actually break down every variable into mini pieces so you can actually test every single one of the variables. Then you have the visual format, which is actually super important. Is almost as important as the angle. Actually, sometimes is depending on your stage, it can be more important than the angle, just not in most cases. But it's literally how you put it all together visually, whether it's an image, whether it's a video. And we're also going to break down what constitutes the variables within the visual format concept also that you're going to be testing. And by the way, guys, bear in mind, I say infinite variables versus finite variables, right? Which are the variables that you can test forever and variables that probably you're only going to be testing for a while. And then you're going to be focusing on other variables. What do I mean by that? I mean that, for example, testing the spokesperson of your videos, for example, or even of your brand is something that's finite. It's not going to move the needle. At some point, testing a blonde female is not going to make any difference versus testing a sometimes even a blonde male, but definitely between testing a non-blonde female, for example, as the spokesperson of your brand. And by the way, we're going to be talking a little bit about this because a lot of people get surprised when I say you should be testing the spokesperson of your brand. A lot of people by default, they just have the business owner as the spokesperson, or they hire a spokesperson in a very poor way. But this is something that you should be testing, and with AI, it's easier and easier to test it. Okay. But anyways, so angles you can test it forever. Like there's always a limited amount of angles and even mini angles, right? Because this is the script. This is what's being said, what's being conveyed. So even when you have a big concept that's working, for example, for one of my clients, it's saying that Russell Brunson used the same strategy to grow his business, and then we sell business coaching. That's the main angle that always works, but we're always testing mini angles. What's the big idea that ties this Russell Brunson concept with our actual offer? What's the hook, right, that makes people stop scrolling so they can listen to our big idea? What are the mental triggers that actually make them click on your ad and be really well pre-qualified to perform an action on your website that tie it all together, right? So this is infinite. You can be testing this forever. Spokesperson, as I said, pretty limited. And you also have the editing style, right? So obviously, when you're talking about videos, that's for videos only. These two things are for both images and videos. So the visual format and the angles, and these two things are obviously just for videos, right? You could technically do spokesperson testing with images, by the way. I've done it quite a lot. And by the way, it's a very cost efficient way of testing it. But then at scale, this is obviously going to be something you're going to be testing more. You're going to be testing more for videos. But technically, you could do this for images as well. Obviously, editing style is just for videos. Okay. And then editing style, you can have TikTok-y style, cinematic style, simple style, and direct pitch, plus subtitles, and sometimes even just B-roll style. And more, you can play around with all these styles and have all of them combined into the same big editing style that you're testing. But these are the main variables, guys. And then for each of them, there are pretty much two main pillars. The first one is, I already mentioned, 80-20. So 80-20, take some time to think about the main one that you should be testing right now. So for example, if you're already media buying or if you're a business owner and you already know the main angles that are working, maybe if you just haven't tested the spokesperson at all, it can be an 80-20 for you, right? Or let's say you always have pretty much the same visual format and you already tested angles quite a lot, and you don't have a team that knows how to play with AI, and you can't really hire a spokesperson. So just test the visual format, right? So based on your production capabilities and based on how much you have already tested of each of these main variables here, determine the next 80-20. Having said that, this is in order of importance, right? So if you haven't tested enough angles, I would definitely start with the angles. If you haven't tested enough visual formats, then I'll test visual formats, then editing styles, and then spokespeople. Okay, very important. And having said that, for each of them, you're going to have obviously, as it's called, mini variables. So within the angle, you have the big idea of the script, you have the hook, the first few seconds of the script, you have the mental triggers, the storytelling flow, how you piece it all together in your story, and then remember to check the avatar based patterns because more and more you need creative variety and you need creative volume to make sure you're going to be crushing in most video based ad platforms. So this is not just for Meta, by the way, this is for organic as well. This is obviously a lot for Meta, but this also works obviously on YouTube, on TikTok, etc., etc. It's for most video based platforms or static based platforms, by the way. It's just obviously it's not too relevant, even though you can use these concepts for example, Google search, but it's not too relevant for search based ad platforms, just so we're very, very clear. For search based ad platforms, obviously, these things here you should and you can be testing, but sometimes it's very technical, right? It's very keyword based, so it's going to be a completely different game. I will really use this for video based ad platforms. Okay, and then final thing, because I know I've been talking for too long already, and then we're going to start with the questions and all the fun stuff, but a lot of people don't think about it. The second pillar, because the first pillar is prioritizing the right variables, and the second one is making sure they are all congruent. Okay, so they're all congruent with each other for the avatar that you're testing, and this is very, very important, right? And a lot of people are not don't go deep enough in their avatar research. For example, they're gonna say, I have still a supplements brand. So initially, I asked my copywriter, and I fired him, by the way. But I asked my copywriter, "Who's our avatar?" And he told me women over 30. And I told him that's not an avatar. So we had a very fun conversation, and eventually I fired him, and I ended up with many avatars and sub avatars. For example, the woman from over 60 who also is worried about her skin, who has problems potentially in her marriage, etc., etc. So you can go very, very deep with your avatars. Try to be as granular as possible. Honestly, this would be enough to have a whole different class. So we're not going to talk about this today. But just to give you guys an example, for a supplements brand for weight loss, for example, you can have women from 30 to 50, women from 50 to, for example, 60, 65, and women over 65. Could be three main avatars, and then go very deep into the sub avatars. Okay, within the women over 65, for example, who are these avatars? They're going to be completely different people within these women, obviously. Okay, so understand the avatar and build for that avatar. Even if you start big, even if you just start building for, okay, I'm going to start with women over 30. At least you know you're doing something, even though that would be too generic, right? But then obviously, if I'm doing this, let's say I'm doing for women over 30, I'm obviously not going to have a 20-year-old necessarily in my video, for example. Right? That can be obvious. For some people, by the way, they do the other way around, right? But in this case, yeah, it probably wouldn't work. So probably wouldn't work. Editing style, same thing. Maybe if it's too TikToky for older women, maybe they're not gonna like it. That's literally a hypothesis, right? So be hypothesis based, and then obviously you're gonna test the congruent formats, right? Even between the formats. So for example, let's say I have a concept for older women that's really scientific. It's very scientific based. I'm explaining to them why my weight loss product is going to help them lose weight based on scientific arguments, scientific research, and all that fun stuff. Right? Maybe once again, the TikToky style is just not going to work, right? Because the TikToky style is really to get people's attention. It could. It's just a hypothesis, but my hypothesis is that probably it wouldn't work. Right? Same thing for the visual format. Maybe a visual format of UGC recording with like a vlog of some influencer is not going to be the best person. It's not going to be the best spokesperson to have a scientific big idea, right? Maybe for a scientific big idea, I want to have a doctor as a spokesperson with a very simple editing style because it's like a doctor talking to you, right, in his clinic. With a very clean visual format as well, where you just have authority in the background. So you have visual authority because the whole idea of this angle is them conveying authority. So very quickly with this example, you see how you can put it all together, make it all congruent for one specific avatar. That's, for example, women over 60. And my hypothesis is they need this scientific approach to actually convert. And that's how you become a very, very high level creative operation. And then, quick spoiler for the next ones, guys, but we're going to see this in the next one. I talk about all the AI tools that you can use to actually execute on that. I talked about how to benchmark competition so you don't have to figure it all out by yourself. You can reverse engineer from what's already working and then 80/20 from that. And then finally, I also talk about workflows and organization on how you're going to manage a team to execute this for you if you have the means to do that. You don't need to do it yourself. And even if you are doing it yourself, you need to understand that you're actually performing all of these roles. At the same time, you're going to be a creative strategist, an editor, a designer, a copywriter, and you need to be able to switch your hats in order to be able to do that. And then eventually, you're going to be able to switch your hats again to analyze the data like a data analyst, and then take specific decisions as a media buyer based on this data, based on this creative strategy. But these are going to be things we're going to see in the next sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Antonio said. Like that was pretty deep stuff, and it wasn't either like it wasn't absolute either. So it was like you can adopt it however you want to adopt it to any business. So I mean, I think the biggest thing is making creatives or content tailored to a particular avatar is always going to be true. And one thing I'll add is like you're not making content for people anymore. You're making content for the algorithm, and the algorithm finds the people. So ultimately, like that is the job of us. And the future will be AI making content for AI, and we're just there, just getting served by AI. So
I love it.